The realities of racial prejudice, forgotten by many, disregarded by too many, and swept under the carpet by so many in the hope that it would remain there, they've all returned. We have to thank this device, the cell phone with its camera and social media capabilities, and thanks to security cameras that are now everywhere. Those recent shootings that would have remained in newspapers and the major television stations for as long as it takes a meal to digest are now the topic of discussion everywhere. In this program, community leaders in our Brooklyn communities are my guests. To discuss this, they are all Black with experiences that qualify them to discuss this important topic. The attitudes towards Black people in this country and the treatment of Blacks by people who, if they follow the Bible teachings that America was founded on, should not be happening. My guests are Senator Jesse Hamilton, who recently spearheaded a march for community and police to unite against violence. Reverend Charles Galbreath, who from the pulpit preaches salvation, not just of our souls, but from the hatred of others and from our own behaviors that hurt us. And Marlon Samuels, a young, successful corporate leader in America. Except for the native Indians who the Europeans found here and disregarded their claim that they founded America, whites in America, Blacks in America, Hispanics in America are all immigrants. Already I can feel that this is going to be an interesting discussion. Viewers, you still have time to call up a friend and tell them to tune in to this discussion that will not only examine the realities of racial prejudice, but beyond that, look at where do we go from here. And let us begin with the lack of honesty about race. Senator, we'll begin with you as the politician who represents so many in Brooklyn.
Right. I think many white Americans don't feel that they're racist or they're prejudiced because in their daily lives, everything is fine. I remember a couple who moved to Crown Heights from Park Slope. They were drinking wine on the stoop, and the police came and gave them a ticket, tried to arrest them. And they were like, wow, that happens in Crown Heights? So a lot of institutional racism, that's what affects us as far as a lack of education, a lack of quality housing with the highest homeless rate in New York City with the largest amount of construction going on all around us. As far as unemployment or underemployment of our young Black men. And also mental health is an issue that we haven't tackled yet in communities of color. Right now, the second leading cause of death for young men and women 15 to 35 is suicide in the Black community. So there are many underlying issues that have to be addressed. And I think if those communities that are proactive get more resources, those who are not united and proactive get less resources. And it goes back to tribalism. Who can get more for their community?
Reverend Galbraith.
I agree with the senator, and I would also suggest that the United States has a history of racial struggle, but also racist denial, that they're not willing to be honest with the reality of the founding of this country. And then the issue begins the silence of so many who are not willing to be honest about what's taking place. It is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. who says and suggests that our lives begin to end when we are silent about the things that matter. And when our America is silent about the things that matter, it becomes problematic to particularly the African American and Black community.
Mr. Samuels.
I would have to agree with the senator and Reverend Galbraith. One of the fundamental issues that we have, and you clearly said it, which is the denial of the fact that this is an issue that actually exists. And when you look at statistics clearly show that when and I was reading one earlier today, where when a Black or a white person sends out a resume or an application for a job, the individual with the Black name is 50% likely to not receive a phone call. When you look at the auto dealership, when you walk into the dealership to purchase a vehicle, it is said statistics have proven that African Americans, Blacks, will pay at an average $700 more than their white counterparts. And the statistics goes on and on and on. And if there's anyone who deny the obvious state of racism in America, you are really showing that you're part of the problem. And I think what you're doing right here is a great platform for us to really bring these issues to the table, and let's bring some actions.
Great.
So let's feel free to do that.
Right.
And don't wait on me to ask you the question.
I think it, as Pastor Galbreath mentioned, education is
Yeah.
key. And as Brother Samuel said, education is the key. Right now, in America, if you are a slave and you learn how to read, you could be put to death. But for somehow the narrative has changed where people don't want to read anymore. We have in Brownsville only 13% of our children are reading at grade level. And then you wonder why they have a high incarceration rate. You wonder why they have the lowest life expectancy in New York City. And so right now we have the Asian community, which is the smallest percentage of minorities in New York City. 6% go to Brooklyn Tech, 70% are in Stuyvesant. My son's in a program where the study for a test in October, they start in January. And he's going to school now in the summer prep camp 5 days a week, 4 hours a day. So I think once we control the educational system and have students who can come out with being able to read and write, and write a resume and not have, I'mTheMan.com on their resume. So a lot of it is parental involvement and the stakeholders who are teaching our kids, teaching them an education where they can get a job when they get out of school.
So it's not just controlling the educational system, but controlling our kids. And you
Absolutely.
mentioned earlier
Absolutely.
parents, the responsibility of parents.
Right.
And how do we get parents to live up to that responsibility? And how do we motivate our kids to want to study? I mean, it's as though we've moved from the back of the bus to the back of the classroom. How do we change that?
I think there's several different models, but I really do believe in people understanding their history, because I think you have to understand what's possible. And for so many of our young people, there's a hopelessness that is there. We have something called Occupy the Corners, where we, as clergy, go and connect with, as well as elected officials and community leaders, go and connect with young people on the streets. And there's a hopelessness that is just palpable. But I think when people are able to understand who we are and where we come from, the possibilities of what you're able to do, and then an opportunity that's connected to that possibility. So my biggest thing is education, but also empowerment through jobs. I think that we have to saturate our community with jobs that people can obtain, can engage with, and provide them hope. One example that we're working on with the clergy is Code for Life. Providing coding classes for young men and young women to be able to have a tangible tool and guide to be able to advance within this high-tech society. When we're on the street, they say, Reverend, I don't want to be on the street. I don't want to do this, but give me a job. And listen, I don't have a job to give them, so we started to try to make some creative solutions and say, what can we do? Because when someone has an employment making $70,000 to $80,000 a year, and that's what these coding jobs are starting off offering, they have less incentive to be idle. They have less incentive to start trouble. So I think the education piece is critical, but also the opportunity piece and making that a tangible, attainable thing for our young people.
I think I want to piggyback on that because education is real important, and providing jobs in the community is so important. At the same time, we need to bring a lot more resources in the communities. We being in corporate America, I've seen where we've gone out and we've done tons of job fairs and trying to get individuals employed, but the skills are just not there. The soft skills, the right training. So we really need to start getting resources in the communities. We start with our churches. We start with our more community programs directed at getting young people off the streets and getting just more knowledge in our communities. And I think that's going to be fundamental. I think we need to have more programs towards parents as well, because who could be a better teacher to our children but our very own parents? And I think it's important that we have programs in our communities. And I'm not the guy to really talk about the how. I can tell you they're experts for that. But for me, I can tell you from my vantage point, we need more programs in the community. And I think it's going to make such a huge difference because when you have knowledge, it builds your confidence in terms of your performance on the job, in terms of your behavior altogether. When you find individuals who are not properly trained for a job, they're not effective. They can't be effective because they don't have the right skills. So I really believe that we got to start with that.
I agree with the parental piece and the familial piece, but the challenge, and I'm a preacher, so I'm going to go to the text. Jesus asked one person, do you want to be made whole? And so the question is, not only are these things offered, but do parents really want to engage with this? Because we have in our churches and within our communities various parenting programs, guidance programs in regards to how to dress yourself, give you tithes, a host of things, how to put together a resume. The question is, what is the motivation that we can put to engage some of these young people? And I think it's the seeing that it's not just something hot pie in the sky, but rather it's something attainable that they can actually actualize.
And self-esteem is a major component. In Brownsville, we have the campus, and as Pastor Galbreath just talked about, technology and wellness is part of the campus. We have 42 community-based organizations. It's not only for the children, it's for the parents also. But a lot of times we have the computer technology, and we have the hardware, but we have no one to teach it. So that's part of the problem because, as the pastor said, you can make $80,000 a year coding, but we're only paying people to teach coding $40,000 to $50,000 a year. So there's a disconnect there somewhere. We have to pay extra money, $5,000 now, to get a coding class. So that's something we're looking at trying to do is to get more people to teach coding in our communities.
You know, when the president spoke recently, he quoted scriptures. And he says that scripture tells us that in our sufferings there is glory. Because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance, character, and character, hope. And he said sometimes the truth is hard to see, the reality is hard to see. You guys, all of a sudden, your demeanor changed. How do we change that?
The reality is that black on black crime is out of control. And I mean, we're talking about the police shootings, and that's horrific, what's happening. But at the end of the day, I worked in the DA's office, and to see the amount of young lives that are being wasted, and young women stabbed to death over a comb. Some things that's unconscionable to the average person, but in some communities, young men are dying for a pair of sneakers, a watch. The church is a major component. The business community has to come back. Many people grow up at night, try to leave, and never come back and say, "Hey, I made it. You can make it too." So we have mentors in our community right now. We're like with PS 284 to make sure we have people coming back who are successful. To say, "Look, I did it. You can do it too." And we need to get more of our churches involved. We do have the Four Corners throughout some parts of Brooklyn, but if every church were to adopt a school and to speak to the young men and to speak to the parents, they can make an impact. And so we need to have more churches coming out and getting involved. And that's more going back to the grassroots effort of, community raising a child, where everybody looked up to each other. So until we tackle that black on black crime issue, other people are saying, well, you're doing it to yourselves. So how can you blame other people for what's happening?
I hear what you're saying, Senator, and I agree with you, but I believe they're interconnected.
Right.
I believe that the black-on-black crime, as well as the police brutality challenges and the tension that's present with the police are interconnected. And I've been with you, and you've been with us when we have stood on the corners. Every time there's a shooting within the area, I believe God has given me the responsibility for in the 45th District. Whenever there's a shooting, we stand up as clergy, we stand up as community leaders, and when there is police misconduct, we also stand up. And so I think it's when other media groups say that we only stand up when there's police shootings, it's a little disingenuous. And I believe that they're interconnected. I believe when we have a distrust and there's a tension that is present, it makes the DA's office job a little bit more difficult. They're always coming to us saying we need people to testify, we need people to engage. But if there's not a trust in regards to the criminal justice system, and they feel as though they are not supported, and they feel as though that's not going to be anything that's going to lead to actual change, they're going to disengage, and the black on black crime continues. So I believe they're not disconnected, but interconnected, and both need to be addressed.
How do we get blacks to treat us differently? And I'm going to come back with that after this word from young Ms. Esperance.
Students have been making demands for schools to increase demographic diversity among faculty in undergraduate admissions. The Demand.org produces appeals of groups of students from 79 different colleges without any two groups such as African American and whites opposing one another. The single most demand is for diversity among students. However, African American students urge that non-white candidates, preferably black, are made a priority for faculty recruitment. Surveys have been distributed and questions have been answered, but what comes next for these universities is something to think about. Sam, the question is, where do we go from here?
Thank you, Kellan. You know, we've had all these protests across America. What has been the impact of these protests, you think?
I think it's awakened a lot of people throughout America. Unfortunately, what happened in Dallas, the conversation, the narrative now has expanded. People are saying, maybe there is a problem in the black community. Why would someone risk their lives at 25 to make a statement in shooting 11 police officers? So I think you're going to have more dialogue. The conversation is going to be heightened as far as what are our next steps. And myself, we had a march yesterday, but we met this morning to talk about what is our next steps going to be to make systemic change, lasting change within the police department and within our communities. We need community policing. That has to happen. We need the police officers to know the people in their community. So it's not like an occupying force coming into the community. So when you have the roll call, they need to go to the community centers, go into the schools, not to arrest the kids, but just to find out who the kids are that are the good kids, who are the kids that need help. And so we have to have more engagement and less arrests and more rehabilitation of our children.
Robert?
I think that the protests have worked in a two-tiered sense. On one area, it's almost as the prophet pointing out what's broken, right? Pointing out what is wrong, what is ought within society, within the world. And I think that's important, and we can't rush past that because many times people want to rush to the healing and the unity piece with not addressing the root causes of what's taking place. It's like when I was growing up and my mother would tell me to clean my room and I would rush to hide things underneath the bed or the closet. It looked clean at the moment, but inevitably on closer inspection, stuff would spill out, mess would spill out. And I would suggest mess is spilling out in the United States. The mess of hate, the mess of violence, the mess of racism is spilling out. And if we rush too quickly to engage in a kumbaya moment, we miss the hurting moment. So it's hurting. So recognizing the hurting, but then speaking a word of what can be. So it's addressing the pain, but then speaking, what do we want from this country? What do we want our communities to look like? And so I think it has to be that two-tiered approach of calling out what's wrong, but just don't leave it there. See what can we do to build solutions.
I got to agree with that, and I want to first say my condolences to the families that have been impacted, whether on the side of the young men who were killed, or the police officers, 5 police officers who were killed in that response at the rally. I think just like my fellow panelists here, we are making a very big statement with the marches, with the protests. It is getting it out there that we have a problem, and it's a problem that needs to be addressed. And one of the things that I think needs to happen is we need to raise the standard. We got to bring more accountability among ourselves as African Americans. We have to start getting in the communities and building relationships with our young people. I think oftentimes we talk a lot, and we've seen it in the church. When the young person, I know I was a victim of this in the church, when you have a different style, or just you carry yourself a different way, you dress differently, and the older folks in the church will criticize you and talk bad about you instead of, just coming alongside and getting to know me as a person. And when you build relationship with me now, you have a better way of impacting me and say, hey, son, maybe you should pull your pants up. And that puts me in a position where I can say, you know what, I know you care about me. And you're saying that because there's, you have my best interest at heart. And I think we need to, build more relationships in our community. And as we do that, we can raise the accountability now with our young people, because we're in a position where we've shown them we care about you and we want to help you. We don't want you to become a statistic. Now, we also got to hold law enforcement accountable also for their actions as well. There is obviously something within our system that gives the impression that it's okay to shoot first and have conversations afterwards. And I think it's important that we that we raise the discussion, have more conversation around this, get more political leaders involved, lawmakers who can implement, and again, you're a better guy to speak on this, but we really need to have more laws in effect that will hold officers accountable. They have to think twice. I was speaking to a friend of mine who was a cop. He's a sergeant in the NYPD, and one of the things that he said to me, he had a group of his officers who had a young man who it was a domestic violence kind of situation, and the young man was just uncontrollable. He was just very aggressive, and guns were drawn, and he came on the scene and he looked at his guys and he said, "Guys, put the gun down." And he said, "What's going on, man?" And the guy said, "Give me a cigarette." And apparently this guy's been asking for a cigarette the entire time when guns were drawn. And he gave the guy a cigarette, and after giving him a cigarette, they started having dialogue. The guy calmed down, and they were able to take him in and without incident. We have to start having dialogue more. We got to raise the intelligence level, the training within law enforcement. It has to happen. When there's no accountability, you will pull for that gun first. And that's one of the challenges I think we're having right now. And again, I agree with everything said here, but that's one of the areas accountability has to increase.
What can elected officials do differently, and what can the church do differently?
I think in the city council, we have the majority of the city council being minority members. But the PBF is a Police Benevolent Association, is a powerful union. And with the young man who was convicted but got probation. And then we had a recent shooting where a Guyanese man shot another black man. So I don't want to see people of color, police officers, being the scapegoats to address police brutality, and they're the only ones that go to jail. There's a mindset in America. In the police department, I've been through the Civilian Police Academy. It's okay to go into black neighborhoods and use curse words. They tell you that. So it's part of the training. I said, well, why would you use use words that will offend somebody? So, well, that's the way what they will understand. So, and then the New York State Senate is not controlled by members from New York City. It's controlled by the Senate Democrats, Senate Republicans rather. And when I first went to the Senate, they would always say, up here in the North Country. I thought they were talking about Canada at first. But they have a different mindset, and they just pass laws, less funding for our kids, for after-school programs, for summer programs, but they'll increase funding for prison incarceration because it provides jobs in upstate New York. It's economic development for upstate New York. So as elected officials, we have to do more. Hopefully we'll have the majority in the Senate in this November, and you'll see changes in the laws. Whereas I believe we should have more money on the front end for our kids, for after-school programs, enrichment programs, job training, rather than once they get arrested and get a record, then you give them the funding. But they have a record now, so they can't get a viable job. They're just more or less like the underclass and the working class in our community. So that's something we have to look at as our legislative part of view.
Perfect, Galbreath. I interrupted you earlier, but go on.
No problem. For the church, I stand as a leader of the church, someone who's grown up in the church, who's been faithful to the church. And so I think I'm in the position to call out the church, to say we can do better. We can step up in some major issues in areas, and I call out my colleagues who I love, my pastors, those who are ministers, to be involved within this situation and circumstance. If we are silent, the Bible says you should know them by their fruit. And if we're silent, I suggest that our fruit is suspect. Let's not have suspect fruit. Let's be involved in making some changes.
We're running out of time. Mr. Samuels, you have the last word.
Well, again, it goes back to what we were saying, what I was saying before, and one of the challenges that I really want to touch on, and I know we probably have
30 seconds.
30 seconds. The silence. The silence. There's a silent culture, I should say, within our community, within the law enforcement, within our political leaders. The silent. We've heard speeches, and speeches are great. We need action today. And the church, and I appreciate what I've heard out of the political leader here in our midst, and also our clergymen. We need actions, and I think that's what's going to really bring us into a place of change.
I want to thank you for being on Brooklyn 45 to discuss
Thank you for having me.
We're going to have to continue this discussion.
Absolutely.
And we need to bring law enforcement on
agree.
future programs, and also to bring members of the white community to future programs. Marlon Samuels, Reverend Galbreath, and Senator Jesse.
Thank you for having us.
very, very much for being on Brooklyn 45.
Thank you for having us.
This is Brooklyn 45. I'm Sam Taitt.